presentation. So, speaking of beautiful presentations, I don't think I can top it, but I'm going to go next. I'm going to talk about first a show that is probably the most recently aired of all the ones we're covering tonight. I'm almost certain. Well, one of two, but maybe the most recent. Anyway, it came out in 1919. Whoops, wrong century. It came out in 2020, and it's called HELSTROM, and this was produced by Marvel Television when this entity existed, and of course that's owned by Disney, ABC. All of them had kind of a little hand in the pie. It's ABC signature slash, and now it's Hulu, also owned by Disney. So you can only see it on Hulu, and um, so it was based on Marvel comic book characters, and it is the darkest thing Marvel's ever done on film so far. After a rewatch of that, I can't see any. I think that's inarguable. Now they may top it going forward. I don't know, but it was set within the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it didn't have any guest appearances or crossovers. It just had a few kind of landmarks and signs in the background that you are here kind of thing, of common companies or businesses, and it was intended to set in the same universe as the Netflix shows, Marvel shows, which were originally supposed to be in the MCU too, and then for some reason for years they suddenly weren't, and now they are again. But they haven't reclaimed Hellstrom yet, so it's still on Hulu. It hasn't been added to the sacred timeline on Disney Plus, but Disney Plus still wants you to watch it, just because they own it. What the hell? Though I don't think they were very proud of it. Marvel Television, just briefly, was run by Jeff Lieb, who's a pretty good. Some argue great, and I wouldn't, but a pretty good comic book writer, and but definitely had a vision for Marvel Television that was within Kevin Feige's vision of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But as Keith clarified for us on our X-Men show, that maybe Mr. Feige wanted more control over how everything fit together. Of course, I being a reactionary to about certain things, censorship, always took it as he was squeamish about the adult material. Keith made a good argument that that wasn't the case. However, I believe my theory that Disney was squeamish about the material.
I could see that. I could see
Yes,
Disney
yeah.
being a little nervous about it.
And this show especially, because the way they had to market this show, basically you had to kind of either already be familiar with the property to know what it was really about, or you had to go all the way to the end of the only 10 episodes and use your thinking cap the whole time. And then you're like, oh, okay.
Right,
So
right.
a contemporary show of it was on Netflix called The Exorcist, based on, of course, the franchise. And I have watched that series, and in my humble opinion, it's trash. I hated everything about it, except I did think Gina Davis was a pretty interesting recast for the character that Linda Blair played in the first two movies.
Oh,
She's certainly
weird.
a great actress. Sharon Gless was not a good recast for Chris McNeil. She's about 25 years too young to have been Gina Davis's mother. So that was a bit, and they never really seemed to know what to do with her. And of course, now Blumhouse has done a whole movie telling us what happened to Chris McNeil with Ellen Burstyn, which I haven't mustered the interest
Yeah.
yet. But this man right here,
Yeah.
Justin Cotton, has done our work for us. He has watched it.
Yeah, I have watched it. Yeah, it was good.
Okay.
I forget
But
the reason I liked it so much, but anyway, it was, uh, yeah. Well, look, it was good to see. I'll just say briefly, it was good to see Ellen Burstyn after all these years, because I love the original from 1972, 73.
Mhm.
And her part when it was good, sort of a cameo, but quite a detailed cameo. And Linda Blair appears in the final scene as well,
Oh,
as
wow.
an adult aging person. So yeah. So although nowhere near as good as the original, I'll give it maybe 3.5 out of 5. It's worth a look.
Well, the
all right.
TV series, and I'm bringing up the TV series for several very specific reasons, not just to go on a rabbit hole, but this is related. It's on the same rabbit hole. Um, is that the series really thematically and continuity wise, except for the Regan reveal, which you don't know that at first Gina Davis is playing Regan McNeil. She's lived under an assumed name because, wouldn't you, after all that.
Yeah.
It really, continuity and tonally, has like really no connection to the first three films. Each of which have their own tone, though arguably there are some people who feel like the first two are more in line with each other because they focus on Regan. Then there are others like me who believe the first and third are more in line because they are both done by Blatty and focus on Father Karras, who is the titular exorcist. So I think all three have their strengths. I think the second one has some weaknesses, but I'm fond of the three of them. I saw the third one in the theater, and all those urban legends for anyone too young to have seen it in theater are true. Everyone jumped when that thing crawled. Never mind. It did exactly in the theater what it does to people now, that they write these clickbaity articles. Did you know there's a scene in this movie? It's like, yes, we jumped. We all jumped. I have unfortunately seen the prequels, both cuts. But anyway, this show was we're kind of off the mark, but it did try to rein in some of the continuity as it went on. I really think, but Gina couldn't really hold the thing down by herself. Now, the reason I'm going into this is not just because they came out around the same time, but they're both about exorcisms. And arguably the inspiration for the comic book character, Damon Hellstrom, it was the film The Exorcist. The original idea that Marvel had around 1972 was that in one of his rare moments of, light bulb going off all by himself, Stan Lee said, "Let's do the Mark of Satan. We're doing the Tomb of Dracula." And, Roy Thomas, the editor-in-chief, was like, "Well, I don't know, man. Even as the villain, I don't know if that's going to fly. I mean, we're barely getting vampires and werewolves now into the comics code, And who knows how that went down. I'm sure you could make comedy skits about those two, going at it over this. But from what Roy has said, some of this to me directly on the phone, the first time I ever talked to him on the phone, I interviewed him at length, and that was one of the first things I asked him. Tell me about the son of Satan. And so Roy created instead this character, Damon Hellstrom. And then there's a possibility also that the last name was a takeoff on, of course, the word hell, but also the Hellstrom Chronicles, which the movie was out around that time too. Roy was an avid movie watcher, and all you have to do now is go back and watch a lot of 1970s genre movie trailers, and then go back and look at old 70s Marvel Comics ads. Same hype, same kind of verbiage. I mean, the two were feeding Don McGregor, a great Marvel Comics writer who's responsible for a lot of material in Black Panther, the film. He wrote a movie review column for several of the magazines, as well as writing some of their best comics. And I'm hoping one day we'll get him on the show. I can't really say anything else. I don't know if we ever will, but it's been high on my attempting list because he just knows so much about movies and helps shape so much, obviously in comics too. But so Roy created Damon Hellstrom, and he was the son of Satan. At this time, there was a book called Ghost Rider, and this is the original character called Ghost Rider. And the original character called Ghost Rider, not the original. The original was a Western character who was like all white and had like a white horse, and I think he used phosphorus to spray everything. Of course, he probably died of cancer and speak the 1870s or whatever. But what an idiot! But whoops. But
knowing what we know now,
yeah, it's like the asbestos man. Battled the Human Torch and survived and then died. So the thing is, the original Ghost Rider, was a Western character. So the modern one was a biker. Again, this was a Roy Thomas idea. He wanted a character who was kind of cashing on the biker craze of movies, and also he wanted to have kind of the leather look of like Elvis Presley was trying to, when Elvis Presley was doing his comeback, which was very R&B influenced, which I personally thought that tour was probably his very best work, singing and recording of that era. And he did look cool. there's the opposite of what everyone thinks of him with the white and the studs and everything. But he looked kind of like a leather, sort of like a leather biker. And Roy went to see him at Madison Square Garden, and he this is again something he told me himself. Um, when I told Gene that I really would like a character kind of dressed like that. So, and then he thought motorcycles, well, okay. So they had the name Ghost Rider, and they weren't using it. In this case, they actually did own it, but they weren't using it. And sometimes they picked up other people's names, other people's owned, and used them.
Right.
But in this case, they own Ghost Rider. It had originally been a different company, but it was bought by Marvel, and Dick Ayers had done the comic book. But in any case, the Ghost Rider was a modern day Ghost Rider. So he was a biker, and he had a flaming skull. Of course, he's very iconic now. He was rebooted in comics in the 90s, and then like in the 70s, when he was a moderate hit in the 90s, his comic book was huge in the grim and gritty, violent era, though it was a different person who turned into the Ghost Rider. And then, of course, there were the films by Nicolas Cage, where he plays ostensibly the original character, Johnny Blaze, though he looks and acts a bit more like the 90s version. What they didn't do they kind of tiptoed around this in the Nicolas Cage films. They said Mephistopheles gave him his powers or whatever. So in the early 70s, the first time they really decided to use Satan in a comic and show Satan was in Ghost Rider. I can't remember if this is before or after Stan Lee said, hey, let's have Satan pop up. But Satan did pop up, and I was very young, and I had the third issue of Ghost Rider appeared in, and Mike Ploog did the art. And Mike Ploog designed him based on Roy's descriptions. Gary Friedrich filled in a lot of the story details, Johnny Blaze, and the fact is basically he sold his soul to the devil, and he got ripped off. And so at night he would become this flaming creature with still his right mind. But Marvel was big on the transforming into monsters. That was that's in their DNA. But yeah, I bought that issue, and it really did scare me because the way they do Satan was pretty amazing. Because Ploog doesn't show you Satan's face. There's just like these two red eyes and these giant ram horns, evocative of certain renditions of Satan. And then he's got these long fingernails and this burly chest, and some hint of some wings, and it's all very it was pretty diabolical for a Comics Code rated comic. And mind you, this was 1972, so without giving away my age, I was very young. I mean, I had friends who still couldn't read when I don't even know if I read this. I think my mom read it to me, which probably didn't make her happy about. Well, anyway, Satan, what? But but I was intrigued at a young age. The things that frightened me intrigued me, and eventually I kind of made my way to those things, obviously. So this was a spin-off. The Mark of Satan, they kind of parlayed it into a spin-off of Ghost Rider, to where you have Satan, so they've got it all set up. Satan and Ghost Rider are enemies, and Ghost Rider is fighting the man, the demon that took his humanity and cursed him, took his soul. And so there's a character that wanders in called Damon Hellstrom, and he is there to exorcise a character named Linda, who is a Native American woman who was given the pejorative witch woman. And the art was by Tom Sutton, another really evocative artist of the period who did a lot of work for Warren Comics, and also did magazines, and also did Werewolf by Night and some other things. So they need an exorcist. So Damon Hellstrom's an exorcist. He's the extremely young exorcist. He dropped out of the seminary, and when he first goes to help, though, he asks that they chained him up. They chain him up at night, and it's like, what the hell? So here we go again. And they chain him with a chain of ankhs. And as far as I know, it was the first time I'd seen it. Well, I know it was the first time I'd seen an ankh symbol in my life, but it might be the first time Marvel ever depicted one. And he breaks out, and when he breaks out, he sheds half his clothes, and he's got a giant upside down pentagram on his chest, and a trident, and a red cloak, and he's the son of Satan. And so over his first couple appearances in Ghost Rider, and then he got his own series in Marvel Spotlight, Basically, he starts out as kind of a sinister character when he's, unshackled or at night. But again, it goes through some transformations, like a lot of these transforming characters. The way they transform or the circumstances change a lot in the early years. This was even true of the Hulk, and so finally he kind of gets control of himself, and he does become an exorcist, and he also, but as his day job, he's a professor at Georgetown University. So they picked Georgetown for the series because the setting of The Exorcist,
The
the movie.
Exorcist.
Right. His adventures were
Mhm.
mostly written by Steve Gerber, who is probably my favorite comic book writer ever, and they were very fascinating. He definitely did a lot of occult research, and Damon was a very torn and morally ambiguous character, obviously being the son of Satan, but also fighting Satan, trying to be a good guy, but he's got this kind of seething rage inside and this kind of violent streak. And considering the limitations on the comics code back then, they did it pretty well. So right around the same time, Roy did a little fill-in for a book called Vampire Tales, a black and white magazine, with a character called Satana, the Devil's Daughter, who,
Yeah.
may or may not have, I don't know if Roy intended right away for her to explicitly be Damon's sister or not, but they quickly acknowledged that in the Son of Satan series. The two of them really did not cross over very often, though, in the beginning. Satana tended to have her stories in the black and white horror magazines. They were usually more adult, more sexy, more violent. And she's more of a, I guess she was what maybe Bill Mulligan, who's not with us tonight, would call an anti-villain. I mean, she's not an anti-hero. She's not a villain, but she's not a hero. So she, usually suck people's souls. She's basically a succubus. And the symbology would be a butterfly. When their souls leave their bodies, this butterfly flies away. And sometimes she would just grab the butterfly and crush it. And so, yeah. So I'm telling you all this because this TV show is about these two characters. And they wisely named it HELSTROM after the whole family. They spelled it with one L. I'm not sure if they were trying to be funny or be more subtle or
Now,
be...
Marvel itself has started doing that in the last few years. They
Wow.
they've kind of made they kind of backed off on the double L's in the name themselves.
Well, for a while they called him Hellstorm, which
yeah,
is,
that was avoiding
the first
name.
thing they did.
Yeah, avoiding the name Son of Satan because that was loaded with a satanic
Right.
panic movement
Right.
in the 80s. Right. So
Well, in
they started calling
recent years,
they started doing it Hellstorm, but I've noticed that the more modern incarnation of Damien, they spell it HEL. They don't do the double L that he had in the 70s.
Yeah. Well, also in the 80s, and well, he had it in the 90s, but he was Hellstorm instead of called the
Yeah, when
Son
he
of
was a
Satan.
member of the Defenders, he was still Damien Hellstrom with a
Yeah.
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 And a lot of this series is based on there's a 1990s Marvel reboot, and Marvel didn't do too many very, you should say, cutting edge or adult type comics at all in the 90s, but the DC did, and I would say this was an attempt by Marvel to do a Vertigo DC kind of title by doing Hellstorm. And within the comic book, his name is still legally Damon Hellstrom, but he calls himself that because, well, that's a whole complicated, in other words, what Keith said, and then the end continuity explanation is even more convoluted. So, but the book was called Hellstorm, and it was actually a great series. And, for the last part of the series, a young Warren Ellis was writing it, which he didn't write a lot for Marvel. He went on to do Planetary and a lot of other huge comics and stuff for DC like Hellblazer, but this was his earliest work. He did Hellstorm, and I think they're very imaginative and very interesting, and he plays around with the mythos a lot. So what this show did is it took those building blocks from the 70s I just mentioned, and then the 90s series, and also added bits and pieces from but what the 90s they were kind of calling this kind of sub corner of the Marvel universe, like the Midnight Suns line, where you had like these occult heroes like Blade and Ghost Rider and Damon Hellstrom, and they're all kind of related. And there was a book called Darkhold, Secrets from the Book of Lies, drawn by North Carolina's own Richard Case, who is famous for Doom Patrol. A lot of his work has made its way into that TV show. But that series didn't fare that well. But it spawned a character named Louise Parsons, who was kind of like an ex-nun who was, in the comic book, she's charged with, trying to combat the Darkhold, which is this ancient book of, it's like the Necronomicon for Marvel. It was created in the 70s, and it was obviously, to me, even in the 70s, supposed to be the Necronomicon, but it's the key behind a lot of characters' origins. Such as Werewolf by Night. Now, when Marvel adapted the Darkhold, they used it within the Scarlet Witch mythology. It's in the Doctor Strange 2 movie. It wasn't referenced in the Werewolf by Night, but you never know. He might pop up again and they'll tie it in. But anyway, they plucked Louise Parsons from that. There was a Ghost Rider character called the Caretaker, who belonged to this group called the Blood, who were essentially demon hunters that had ties to the Vatican. And then this is years before the movie Van Helsing came out. And that's become kind of a popular trope, in this millennium, but this is like the early 90s. And the Caretaker character was also used in the Ghost Rider movie with Nicolas Cage, and he was merged with the aforementioned cowboy Ghost Rider character into a kind of a conflation played by Sam Elliott. So he's a different actor in this series. The character's not a conflation with another character. So those are like our major characters of the show, and Victoria Hellstrom, who was always been, the mother of both these two children of Satan in the comic books. Victoria Hellstrom died when they were very young, after she'd gone completely insane from finding her daughter indulging in a ritual with her father Satan in their basement.
In the series, tell them though what the switch and the premise that they give you.
Yeah, this is the switch with the premise. So when this series started, I didn't want to watch it because it said, they dropped the L, and I was like, okay, what are they doing? And they're like, there are these two children of a very powerful serial killer, and they investigate the occult. And I was like, this is gonna suck. Okay, so I was wrong, and actually they were lying. Now their biological father, in one of his mortal incarnations as their biological father, was one of his trades was a serial killer, yes, but that's a what do you call it, a red herring, a MacGuffin? What do you call it when they switch it on you, bait and switch it on you?
Yeah,
yeah. And so that's basically just to get you watching it and think it's a true crime show with a little supernatural hocus pocus. Actually, it's what the Exorcist show should have been. It was a very dark horror show, and when I say dark, I mean it's dark as in, there's way more blood, gore, profanity, and blasphemy than any other thing Marvel's done by far on film. And also, it's very darkly lit. It's very moody. It's very cinematic. It's a lot more like a modern long-form cable show, which that is what Jeff Lieb, those are the qualities Jeff Lieb was going for on the Netflix shows, which is why he, would hire people like Peter Medak and Lily Amiri Aramarapur, or whatever, A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, and Giselle, what's his name, Guillermo Navarro. He hired all these exquisite real film and directors and cinematographers to direct episodes of Daredevil and Luke Cage and Jessica Jones, because he wanted something that was cinematic, and more adult. So Hellstrom, I wasn't really familiar with any of the directors too much. One of the producers is someone named Blair Butler, who apparently is like a comedian and a actress and something, but she put some money into it. And the other executive producers were Joe Quesada, who was running Marvel at the time, Jeff Lieb, who I already mentioned, and this man named Paul. Here we go with the Polish name. I'm so sorry, Polish friends. Zbysewski. Anyway, that guy created the show. So he basically adapted it and came up with this idea. So in the show, for everything he changes or modernizes, he also is very faithful too. He kind of rethinks how this stuff would work. And so it takes place in Portland, Oregon in 2020. So Portland, Oregon, a modern, very trendy city. That was actually a smart thing to do, especially with all the superheroes being in New York City. Now Satana lives in San Francisco, also smart, but not too far from each other, right? So it's nice to have some Pacific Northwest representation, some of that Twin Peaks, vibe in the air. They couldn't, well, they did not, chose not to call her Satana in the show, but they never say that that's not her birth name on her birth certificate either. So for us longtime fans, I like to think her birth certificate says Satana Hellstrom. They call her Anna, A-N-A, Anna.
Mhm.
And so, in other words, basically the title of the show and the characters' names themselves are bait and switches, but all these bait and switches really have come out with what is, in my opinion, one of their most faithful adaptations thematically of anything Marvel's done.
Wow.
They touch on everything that's in the comics. You know, the only difference is there's more cursing, gore, and blood. You know, and there's less costumes. But other than that, it's pretty much it's very similar. It's a hybrid because you know Damon in the 90s in Hellstorm was a little too cynical. He had re-embraced a little too much of his dark side, which made him definitely an anti-hero. He was no longer a hero fighting Satan.
Right.
He actually slew Satan and became Satan, while still being a likable character. And obviously that's a Vertigo influence. You know, I'm not going to say that, you know, Warren Ellis was probably like, well, Neil Gaiman can do this and hell, I can do it in Marvel. And he did it. He did a great job, you know. So in this show, Damon, instead of being an anthropology and archaeology professor, he is an ethics professor. So, you know, we get into all these kind of conundrums that are discussed, moral conundrums. There's a lot of that in here. And then he is an exorcist, but he never went to the seminary that we know of in the show. He was raised by Louise Parsons, this borrowed character who runs a place called St. Teresa's, which actually is a Catholic Church sanctioned psychiatric asylum for criminally insane. So in the show, Damon's it's similar to the arc of the comics. Victoria marries this guy. He goes on a lot of business trips. He's a little mysterious. She doesn't know what his problem is, you know, but she believes everything he says. And so rather than her walking in on him becoming Satan and having the ritual with the daughter in the basement, instead, you know, there is a basement thing. There's like, they're told never to go into the basement. And the basement is basically where he keeps like his relics and trophies of all these people he murders. And and what happens is the way the twins get, well, they don't make clear if they're twins on the show or not. In the comics, they have been almost always depicted as twins, though.
Yeah.
Usually, though, actually, it depends on the writer. Sometimes they're twins. Sometimes one's a little bit older. Usually Damon. In this one,
I think
Damon.
I think there's a cultic symbolism to having them be twins. That I mean, when I watched the show, I mean, I assumed they were twins. You know,
The flashbacks denote it's hard because it's hard to tell with the casting of the young actors. They could be
Yeah.
twins. He could be 2 or 3 years older than her. I don't think she's older than him because she was
No.
a bit more innocent or clueless about what's going on. And so their divide happens when the father, he had been giving her the little girl the trinkets, the trophies of the murdered people, and they were filled with the psychic energies of these women and their deaths. And finally he leaves and he takes Satana with her. He thinks they're more alike. Satana has more of a bent toward becoming what he is, which, you know, at this point, early in the series, you don't know what he is other than a serial killer, but who obviously has a cult affiliation. What you do know, though, is that, and like in the comics, their mother did survive. She did go insane, like in the comics. She went insane when the little girl, not when she went insane when the little girl left, and she thought that they were going to come back. And she went so crazy that Damon, her son, called Child Protective Services, and she was committed to the St. Teresa's where our character Louise Parsons administered, who was a nun at the time. And so there was a decision made by forces outside of the control of these 2 kids who did know what their father really was. So one is Louise, and one is her friend and possible at one time boyfriend Henry, who is this incarnation of the caretaker. And like in the comics, he does belong to this group called the Blood. And the Blood is strictly, anti-Satan, anti-devil, devil hunters. However, they are absolute ends justify the means. They're not nice people either. I hate to say it. So they're led by a woman named Esther, played by Deborah Van Valkenburg, who y'all might remember from The Warriors when she was really young, and also from that show she was on with Ted Knight when we were kids, a sitcom.
Too close for comfort.
Too close for comfort, yes.
Yeah.
And she's quite good in this, and quite unlikable, but her acting is quite wonderful. So Caretaker works for her, and he's been doing this a long time. And they, essentially his brother had been marked by one of these beings that the blood tries to contain or destroy, and which are demons. They're not given a soul nomenclature, but when they mark you physically, then you're ripe for being possessed, either by the same one or by a different demon or a more powerful demon. And so they did that to his brother. His brother did not survive the exorcism, and so he decided to join the blood. And he and Louise had the choice, because the Louise doesn't know everything the blood does. The Vatican does, but the blood knows everything Louise does, and a lot of her patients have been people who've been possessed, but primarily the mother, Victoria HELSTROM. So when she goes insane, that's where she ends up, thanks to Damon kind of reporting her. And then he feels terrible guilt his whole life and decides he's got to kind of live in the same general area in Oregon and be able to visit her all the time and try to get through to her. And she's just kind of buried within this possessed woman. Now, the actress's name is Elizabeth Marvel. Yes, that's her real last name. And she's incredible because she portrays Victoria, but she also portrays the possessed Victoria. Victoria's possessed by a creature called Cathara, or different people pronounce it differently or spell it differently, but in the show they call her Cathara, and with a K. And Cathara is an ancient being, and they hint a lot at her, what she is, and in the very last episode they reveal it. But Cathara has been inside of Victoria this whole time. So like 20 years, the Damon's been depressed. He misses his sister, and he follows himself into academia, and he realizes some of the things he can do. And because of what he realized their father was, he decides he will exercise them when he's needed. But he's a very cynical guy, much like the comic book character. He's a lot like the comic book character. He can be very cynical and dark. He can be kind of romantic, kind of funny, kind of, he's grappling with his nature at all times. And I thought the actor Tom Austin did a really nice job of doing that and modernizing it, making him a little more modern. Like he speaks in some slang. He's not as formal as Damon was in the comics, but he is as intellectual. And
he should be shirtless more, with a big burning pentagram on his chest.
Well, as the series goes toward the end, that starts to happen a lot, actually. His shirt is almost non-existent the last couple episodes. And they did adapt that too, yes.
Yes, they had it like on fire instead of just being like a tattoo.
Because in the comic books, it's his birthmark. It's his birthmark. Yeah. And I can't remember if it manifests until he's in puberty or not, but it's something he's born with as part of his birthright. In the show, his father uses this mystical blade, and this blade, it's kind of like a dagger, and it's like a long dagger, and he scrawls this symbol that's very similar to an upside down pentagram, but the graphic's interesting because it's a little broken. And also you can tell where pieces of it have healed the skin.
Yeah, it's less perfect,
Right, it's less perfect and in your face, but it's also super evocative. You look at it and you're like, this guy's got a cool occult scarification going on, because it definitely is not a tattoo. And he actually, early in the series, he periodically has it tattooed over, and the ink actually absorbs itself back.
You want to get us to Mitch Pileggi and his appearance at the end?
I'm gonna try to go a little faster. I'm sorry, guys. This is an involved story, but
it is.
But I just want to make sure everybody knows, all the necessary things. There is payoff. So yes, we're getting to Mitch Pileggi from the X-Files. So thank you, Keith. And
Just a funny aside, I was dealing with this nasty lawyer on the other side of one of my matters. His name was Pelegi. And I kept starting the email, "Dear Mitch."
Ah.
And
I
his name
thought you were
wasn't
gonna.
Mitch,
I
but
thought you were gonna say, "Speaking of Satan, I was dealing with a lawyer," and I'm like, "But you're a lawyer. You're the good lawyer. You're like
I
you're
always
like the
do that
son
kind
of
of stuff.
Satan of lawyers." So anyway, this show, it's a trip. There's a lot of. Let me get real quick into Anna. So Anna, unlike Damon, she's totally cynical. She has a wicked sense of humor. Her dialogue is quite hilarious. She always has the perfect fashion. She's like totally tall and skinny, and androgynous, and kind of has like a really sharp kind of like Bob, goth Bob. And she's a dealer in antiquities, ancient artifacts and occult artifacts. And she's really all about making money. So, but and she's, she also has abilities. She did escape from the father after he buried her alive as a child. After she'd been on the whole spree with him, watching people being like tortured, killed, burnt to death. She finally ran away, and then he caught her and he buried her alive. But she got out. She's a strong one. And so anyway, she ended up in a foster home, and that's where she met her best friend, Chris Yin. Now, I want to make a very important point about this show, because when the Eternals film came out, a lot was made out of the fact they had changed the character Phastos from the Eternals into a homosexual man. And it's like, now there's a homosexual main character in a Marvel property. Okay, well, HELSTROM beat him to it by a couple of years. There's several in this. Satana is a lesbian, and it's not. If you watch it the first time, you're like, maybe she's just decadent bisexual, but then you watch the second time analytically, like I did, and it's like, no, she's a lesbian. It's all good. And her best friend Chris is an Asian American man who is gay, and they met in this orphanage. So when people talk about representation and diversity in Marvel, they never mention HELSTROM. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on, guys?
Only 10 people watched the show, so
okay, so we mention it. Come on, Disney, help us out, man. But so basically, Chris is a cool character. He is not from the comics that I can discern. He has a boyfriend named Derek Jackson, who's also not from the comics, who is a young black man, also gay. They're monogamous. They have a very loving relationship. To be a cop and a black cop, Derek is actually very cool. But Chris keeps a lot of secrets from him, because Satana has him do certain things. And it's not just finding these occult artifacts. Satana has this side hustle, you could say, that she doesn't make money at it, but Chris, being her confidant, knowing what she is when no one else does other than her strange brother, he helps her clean up after herself. And this is where she is, again, this is a direct adaptation of the comic books. She sucks out people's souls who are worthy of death in her eyes. And they're all people basically like her father. And if anybody isn't sure, they make sure to tell you, like, either show you quick flashes of what this person did or refer to it. They're all like these, basically, they're serial killers, pedophiles, child rapists. Again, they allude to things that they're not going to allude to even in the Netflix Marvel shows, which did come close a few times. But this is like, yeah, we're going to talk about human trafficking and all this shit. And so you're kind of like, well, she's kind of like the Punisher, and she feels like a part of it is her mission is because of she felt the energy, the psychic resonance in those artifacts of those murdered women that her father killed. So this is her way of displacing that rage, of making others feel that pain. And it is kind of like a succubus. And they don't actually show her, they do show her kind of sucking the energy out. They don't show the butterfly like they did in the original comic appearance, but they do in the opening credits. In the opening credits, there's a scene where the light shifts to black and she's a little girl, and then you see the yellow butterfly float up into whatever. So I thought that was a very canny visual callback. for us, 20 people who read that issue of Vampire Tales. But so this is the deal. The mother, Anna thinks she's a lost hope. Damon wants to help her. It goes back and forth. So let me talk about the last major character. Gabriella Rossetti, she is a novitiate or a nun in training. She works for the Vatican. She does not know about the blood at first. She does not really know the whole extent of what's up with St. Teresa. She just knows she's there to train to take over for Louise Parsons, who, unbeknownst to anyone, is dying of cancer. And Gabriella Rosetta is also a protagonist from the comic books. They gender switched her. So in the comic books, her character's named Gabriel Rossetti, created by Doug Minch. He was also known as the Devil Hunter, and he was a tormented, eye-patched, disgraced ex-priest who, basically hunted devils. He appeared in the black and white horror line too, especially in a book called The Haunt of Horror. But he also reappeared in the 90s HELSTROM book. And in that book, he's Damon's enemy, though later they become allies for a time. But you realize quickly early on that he's kind of they don't really make it clear in the 70s stories, but in the 90s take is that he's insane, which, that would fit with what we've come to see about the corruption within the Catholic Church. Though he's really not really part of the Catholic Church by that time. But he's been kind of driven insane by the exorcisms he's performed and the things he's seen. So this series is like an origin story for that character, except they made it into a female character. Because if you follow her for the 10 episodes, by the end of the series, other than being a woman not having an eye patch, she is the same Gabriel the Devil Hunter character, even the way she dresses. And so, but she has to go through hell, literally and figuratively, to get there. And so there's a sexual tension to be expected or not. It's well played, well done between her and Damon. Of course, she believes that, that God is the word, and she hasn't taken her final vows, but that this is going to fix everything, that she's doing the right thing coming here. But she's been warned by the Vatican that Damon, basically may be the spawn of a very evil force. And again, they leave it a little vague in the beginning, but, if you watch The Exorcist, you kind of, pretty much they tell her, yeah, he could be the son of Satan, without ever saying that term ever. And she kind of doesn't want to believe it, probably because she's attracted to him personally, also because she does think she's still in that kind of Christian mode where she believes there's hope for everyone can be forgiven. But at the same time, she's not a pushover. In order to qualify for this mission, she had to go undercover fighting human trafficking. And she had to they don't show any flashbacks, but she talks about it. And she said she witnessed the worst humankind can do to each other. And so she's learned to fight. She's learned to kind of defend herself. She's not as easily shocked or as puritanical or prudish as you might think she is. And, the actress, I'm just going to say it because it's addressed explicitly as a plot point too. Ariana Guerrera. She is a Hispanic actress. Her character's half Italian, Rossetti, half Spanish. And she is just mind-numbingly gorgeous, and she's super sweet. And so if you're Damon, you're probably like, well, yeah, I'm a cynic, but come on. So, but he never hits on her. That's what's interesting. Actually, he keeps her at arm's length, and part of that is because he keeps everything at arm's length because he kind of knows what he might be capable of, and that's what we finally see him driven to in the series. He still doesn't know when the series opens that Satana is like this, succubus vigilante either. There's a lot of these secrets. He didn't know why they were separated at birth or whatever reason, but they decided that Damon was the more sensitive, the one that could be saved. And so the blood had to keep an eye on Anna throughout the foster homes, and that was under the caretaker. And then Damon is essentially raised by Louise Parsons, who runs St. Teresa's. And so as the series goes on, they combat some demons. One demon that they keep having exorcised from different people's named Magoth. And you see kind of bit by bit, parts of what Damon can do, parts of what Satana can do. They both have these great telekinetic abilities. They can make that's obviously a staple of anything with the exorcism in it. It's things moving around and flying through the air. But they do that a lot. They can levitate objects, people. Damon has a certain amount of control over fire. There's a scene where there's almost a oil tanker explosion, and he managed to literally part the flames like the Red Sea, and he's just by walking through it. And it's not melodramatic. He's just very, which makes it even more effective. It's just very matter of fact. Satana, she senses things like objects, like the artifacts she gathers. She can sense things about them, like what kind of energy has been in them, how old they are, which makes her really good at her job and even richer. And so Damon and her have these kind of similar but complementary abilities. And I think one of the fears that the Blood has is that they're going to combine and as adults and combine all their powers and go on a killing spree like their father and be even more horrible. But turns out they're underestimating the human side of these two characters. So after several false starts, Victoria is finally exorcised. So she finally becomes to take a center role as herself, Victoria Hellstrom, kind of post-trauma. And Louise starts to treat her cancer, which they never really follow up on this, but it is revealed that Cathara created the cancer within her. But she never tells anyone this. We only hear Cathara tell her this, and so we know it. But she begins trying to treat it and get an operation by the end. And basically, what it hinges on, it doesn't, the climax is the last 2.5 episodes. So after Victoria is seemingly exorcised and Magath and these demons are put at bay, and they thought their father was back, but it turns out this other demon named Bazar, who is a child of Cathara. Damon and Gabriella celebrate. So they have sex. And but unfortunately, they both wake up with kind of a less than perfect memory of what the hell's happened. And they're really not together. At first, it seems like they're together. Well, they are together at first, but it's not really. It is Damon, but now he's possessed by Bazar. And what they did is the Cathara character, they had destroyed Bazar mostly. And this was, Damon had done a good bit of this, to where he was just kind of like this twisted shell. He was originally a mental patient. And he was like really grotesque, but he was still alive. He was still keeping his shell alive. Like he'd been torn in half. You know, he's just like completely gory. Couldn't talk. His jaw's falling off. The effects are really gross, just to let you know. And so Cathara plucks his heart, soul, whatever out of him and puts it into Damon. And so Damon himself is now possessed by one of the minions of these demons, you know, that he's fighting. Well, possessed by Bazar, who, you know, he had already faced himself. So he leaves Gabriella and she's pregnant overnight. So there's a good chance maybe she could have been pregnant overnight, but then her belly gets big very quickly. And so she goes into an advanced pregnancy. And after an episode or so of Damon being possessed and her feeling hopeless, trying to get through to him because they have fallen in love with each other, but Damon is just like submerged. So this time Satana rises to the challenge. She forgives her mother and she teams up with all the other characters, and they get a hold of this dagger that gave Damon the scar. And Damon had broken it in half when he was a child. So she gets the two halves. Did Briggy leave? Yes. I hope she'll come back. I didn't mean to drive her away. Well, it's satanic. I'm just kidding. So basically, they fuse the dagger together. And once the daggers fuse together, things kind of fall into place. And Damon kind of becomes himself again. But not only that, he manages to destroy these ancillary demons or depossess them. And the dagger, the long dagger in his hands, turns into a flaming trident, which he wields in the comics. And yes, his shirt's torn off and you see the flaming sigil on his chest. So everything seems to be going kind of better. The baby is born, and it is an incarnation of Cathara. So that's a riff on the comic book story where Jane Cutter gets pregnant by Damon after Damon has named his true father, because he's not just Satan, he's a specific Satan, a specific demon. But his father, Marduk Kurios, that's his real name, manages to reincarnate itself in Jane Cutter after he impregnates her. So they adapted that storyline. So she gives birth and they take the baby away, and Chris, through another whole convoluted story, has become a keeper or someone who has these certain mystical abilities to combat this stuff. And with the help of the caretaker, they're gonna, basically keep the child kind of on the down low and try to keep its nature, safe. Hey, welcome back. If you're back. um, so, where was that? My brain.
I think that gets us to the end of the last episode.
It does, because after the baby's born, Gabrielle wants nothing to do with it, and she's changed her whole philosophy. She feels like all of this is evil, the blood, the mental institution, the Hellstrom family. She wants nothing to do with them, not the blood, but they actually become her refuge. She decides that she can't trust Damon, she can't trust Satana, and so basically everybody that saved her, she turns on them, and she joins the blood, and she gets leathered up and ready to go kill some demons and swigs back some whiskey. So Chris, the guy I just mentioned, who was taking custody of custodianship of the child, I guess it goes forward a number of months or a year or two, or maybe the kid just ages fast.
I got the impression the kid ages fast, just like the pregnancy went fast. Like the
Okay,
yeah.
that's cool. I wasn't sure. So they're like in Europe or somewhere, and he's like just her guardian, and he's just like a wonderful guy. And then they meet this guy, Midge Pileggi, yes. And he's shaven head, the goatee, the satanic goatee, and he's got the long fingernails and the ring. He's very Anton LaVey-ish, all black, long leather trench coat. And he wants to talk to the girl. And like, what's your name? And Chris is like, her name's Cathara. And he's like, that's what they told you your name was. Right? Though actually, he's the one who told her that a long time ago. He's like, what's your real name? And she said, I think it's Lily. And so the implication is she's Lilith.
She's Lilith, yeah.
The Lilith. And that he obviously is Satan. And he says, I'm Marduk Hellstrom. And he's like, I'm going to take her with me. And Chris is like, you can't harm me. I'm shielded against you by keeper magic, which is true. So instead he starts just thinking, and people just start dying like flies all along this pier they're on. And he's like, okay. And so he takes the little girl and they walk away, and he's like, let's go and meet your brother and sister. I haven't seen them in a while. So the whole thing's very incestuous. So Marduk Hellstrom is the serial killer, is Satan, is the father of Cathara ages ago / Lilith. Cathara possesses the woman who gave birth to his mortal children. And then Cathara's evil children we met, like Bazaar and them. So they're basically, like Damon and Satana's nephews. So, it's just all about the Hellstrom family. So, and the key tagline, and one of the things is, something like, woe be to us if there's a Hellstrom family reunion. And I think by exploring it from this angle, they've really explored every angle of what this, because all these characters, for the most part, are from the comics, and all these connections, they've just like completely recontextualized it, repurposed it for a modern drama horror series that really doesn't pull any punches and makes you think and laugh, and it's nice to look at.
Yeah, I think what should probably be, I guess, reminded to people who maybe haven't seen it, because that's going to be most people, is that last little bit of a tagline with baby Lilith, who's growing extra fast, was supposed to be the setup for, at least the plan going into this was going to be one of 4 different series that they were going to all come together for a big team up, Defenders style, against Lilith, the mother of demons. So it would have been her like that. It was going to be Midnight Suns with Lilith, and the mother of demons was going to be the villain, which would have been this little girl, would have been Damien and Satana's sister. And that was going to be the setup. And the other one, only one of the other 3 that we know was going to be Ghost Rider. So when they announced Hellstrom, they immediately announced Ghost Rider as well. So that was the plan. We don't know what the other 2 were going to be. I think that was even in flux at the time, but that was the plan. originally.
I wonder if
before.
Blade was going to be one of them because they're talking about him.
I
doing
am
a
sure he
Midnight
want.
Suns.
My guess is that he wanted Blade and Moon Knight at the time. But you know,
I don't
then
know if you caught this, but Oscar Isaac said at a convention that it looks like they are going to nudge him into the Midnight Suns, Moon Knight.
yeah, yeah. So Feige is now building it himself, you know, within
Right.
MCU proper, which is fine. I mean, that's what
And
they're
they can have
doing.
Werewolf by Night appear. I mean, yeah.
Exactly. And you know, I could totally see if they wanted to do it. They've already got them established here. I could see them, you know, pull
They really should.
Satana
Yeah.
into. I could see Elsa Bloodstone having an adventure with Anna Hellstrom, for example.
Absolutely.
You know, they
Absolutely.
would completely work well together.
Yeah, I think
mean,
Damon would be the perfect character for them to do what he does in a lot of the comics over the years, which isn't so much be a superhero, but like consult on the occult.
right. I think
Yeah.
he could almost function as a television level Doctor Strange for the MCU if they wanted to.
Yeah.
In that
Yeah.
way, you know, not quite as flamboyant,
No.
you know, but I think he would be a good thread to be able to utilize if they'll take advantage of it. The actors are good, the show was good,
And
even if it
they're
hasn't been seen.
right, and they're at the right place in the series because now the origins of Damon, Satana, and Gabriella have all been told. And
Yep.
and you know who the father. So now it's like now you know Damon has kind of integrated him. You've seen how he's become more powerful,
Right.
but he's also kind of, you can see that he's capable of love. So again, you have the
And
dichotomy.
if they want to make them more colorful now to make them part of the MCU, then you have that opportunity. Now, you could sort of redress them a little bit to make them a little bit fit a little bit more in.
I would
think
dress
it
him
works
like
fine.
the 90s comic
Pretty much.
where he's
Yeah,
wearing like
that.
the burgundy trench coat, you know.
Exactly. Make it a little bit more stylized, but not quite, you know, with the cape and all of that. But you
Right.
know, I think you could totally work with it. So yeah,
And it
I
would
think
work
it's a
with
good.
Satana because she's already a fashion.
I think
diva.
I think it's a really good foundational thing that could be pulled from for the MCU if they wanted to use it. That way they don't have to worry about trying to recast and reset. They could always just refer to this show, you know, for anybody who's interested, but just integrate them into the show. If they're going to go Midnight Suns and bringing in Moon Knight and all that, be a really good idea to weave in the Hellstroms as well. I think it'd work.
I'm very happy with your commentary, Keith. Hi, this is Henry Covert, and this has been Deep Images. Hope you enjoyed today's segment, and we will be back soon to continue our discussion on Cult TV. Feel free to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for the ending credits and the beautiful music of Ghost of Day, and thank you for watching.